Okay, so today I've got Ingrid Guyon with me, and we're going to talk a little bit about participatory photography and photo voice a little bit as well. So Ingrid, do you want to just say a little bit about how you've used participatory photography in the past?
Well, how can I summarize that? I would say that I have mainly worked in London. I've worked with migrant communities a lot. And probably the processes I've done are about 3 months long,
Yeah.
like once a week. That would include an exhibition at the end. And very few times there has been an agenda to it. I've been very lucky that it was just a space for the group we were working with to talk about whatever they wanted to talk about, which is not easy. A few times we had where there was an agenda, but it was made clear with the participants from the start. So, for example, we've worked a lot with the Jesuit refugee services who work with destitute asylum seekers. And with them, they just wanted a space for the people to talk about their experiences. But some talked about their daughters, some talked about cooking, some talked about how they have been detained. So he's been very open. And in those cases, it has been more like, even though it was a collective process, everyone had their own personal stories. We didn't work on a collective story. But then there was another project where we worked with young carers, and there was a shorter process, but the idea was for them to, it was for carers week. So it was to raise awareness about what it is to be a young carer. So when they did the recruitment of the young people, the people who came, they knew that they were coming to talk about their experience as young carers.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the main advice I would give. Like, make sure you know what you're doing the project for, so that people know. And for this one, it really worked well because they really share their personal experiences, and it was shorter because we knew where we wanted to go, so we could kind of cut a bit the process.
Yeah.
And they were all powerful. I mean, both projects were powerful with very strong stories and personal stories. But then I also have been doing a bit of photo voice for evaluation, and in that case, it becomes more collective stories with participatory analysis, where all the pictures are put together, and sometimes the stories are mixed with others because they talked about the same theme. So it might be more thematic. And then it becomes like a collective analysis of, this is who we are and this is what we think we want to say as a group.
Yeah. Excellent. Going back to the work you do where there's probably no set agenda, and you've got people exploring a whole variety of different issues, and your background's as a photographer. How did you feel about then maybe dealing with issues that came to light that were maybe very sensitive to deal with, or maybe contentious to deal with? Did you feel that was something that came up within the group, or not?
Yeah, it does come up. I mean, I'm a photographer, but I am a facilitator.
Yeah.
More than I'm a photographer.
Yeah.
So when I go in a room to work with a group, I have my facilitator's hat, not my photographer's hat.
Yeah.
And I'm not looking for drama, and I'm not looking for, I'm not a journalist. And when I started to do this work, the first project I've ever done, I was working as a volunteer when I was learning. I worked with young refugees and migrants, like unaccompanied minors, back in 2007, something like that. And the first thing, I was working with refugee youth, the first thing they told me is, never ask what happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
Let it come. And that sticked into my head. And the stories just come whenever they are ready to tell it. And it depends of the process the space that you create. It's all about the space.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never start a project. I would always start telling them that they would talk about whatever they want to talk about. And that when they share something in pairs, they don't have to share it back to the group if they don't want to.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain rules that you need to put in place as a facilitator to look after the space and look after the people.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't open the Pandora box if you don't know how to close it, because we're not therapists.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm very clear.
Excellent.
And if so normally the story would just come out when they're ready, and the group, I don't know how I can explain it, but like it's kind of organic, and then the group would be ready to also hold the space for the person somehow, because it has been a process of playing with the camera and talking about other things that have nothing to do with their personal experiences. But when I feel that there would be traumatic experiences that could come up, then I would always have someone that I can talk to afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So like I would put that as a condition for the client or the group. Like you need to be able to signpost. Or when I started to work a lot with Colombian refugees and migrants, I was really aware of the dynamic and what would come out, because I really know the context.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be ready for it. And the last project I did, I worked with a therapist. And our roles were clear. She was there it was part of the psychological support for victims of the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So she was there to hold a space and do the therapy part, and I was there to do the photography part. But we planned everything together, each session, and we evaluated each session, and then she was available for people afterwards if they needed on a one-to-one basis, because I would have never have done this without a therapist with me.
That's excellent. I mean, that just shines so much with my experience as well. And going back to the power of the group, I suppose one of my concerns at the very start was like, oh, what if something is said that I don't have an answer for? And what I very quickly realized was I didn't need to have the answer, because it wasn't me that it was the group. And the group, as you said, that safe space provided so much therapeutic value for the participants, and that alleviated my concerns and worries about, oh, I need to have all the answers, because I didn't. And it's impossible for one person to have all the answers. So
and I guess you can never know what would happen in a workshop, but if you do create a space the right way, with the right ethics and with the right values, the right energy, and you create that space for playing and laughing, and that's key. And then the rest kind of the energy of the group changes, and there's trust. Not only they trust you, but they trust the others. And then it's also creating that space for when some things arise, talk about it. Someone says something they shouldn't have said, don't ignore it, talk about it within the group, and then find a solution within the group. And find out why it shouldn't have been said, but like not me saying it. It's kind of creating that space so that the group realize that something shouldn't have been said. And then between themselves, they solve it. And, I mean, sometimes there's group where there's someone that would just never get it. And, then you have to deal with it. And there's not really an answer of how do you deal with it? Because it depends who the person is, what the context is, what has happened. And you know, in many of the training I do, some people are like, oh, this happened, what do I do? I'm like, I don't know. You need to have a, you know, a suitcase of tools.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And find the tool that is right for that space and time and context and culture. And because yeah, there's not really a set recipe of what can be done.
No, completely. Because there's so much,
Really.
I mean, it's group dynamics, it's family knowledge of family systems, it's your personal identity. Yeah, it's so much. And you're right, there's that toolbox of knowledge and information. Yeah. Thinking more then around about photo voice, because you mentioned you've been involved in some projects around photo voice as well, and it's more that collective voice, I guess, emerging from the group. And I know that when people talk about photo voice, it usually in conjunction with this concept of empowerment. And I just wondered whether you had any thoughts about whether in the projects you've been involved in with photo voice, whether you've seen empowerment as an outcome that's come from that.
Well, that's a whole dilemma, this word empowerment, because I guess it depends what it means. There's many definitions. Like I was looking at it this morning. Some of them say it's giving the voice and the power to marginalized people, which I found like unacceptable to define it like that. Or others would like to give like the power of decision to people. And so empowerment, I have seen it, but not in this definition. And also there can't be any empowerment into bracket, I would say, if there is no process. So let's share a few examples. Like for me, I have seen some empowerment in the way that some people that I have worked with have never been given a space to reflect on their lives, to talk about their stories. And for me, the fact that on the first session, they would be very shy and don't say much. And then at the end, they would be telling their stories publicly to people they don't know, showing their pictures. For me, that's empowerment. At that time.
Yeah.
It's not going to change their lives. And they might probably not carry that with them afterwards. But at least at that moment in time, they felt empowered. I don't like that word. To speak out, to be themselves, to connect with others in a way that they would never have done it before. And I have seen that again with children that I worked with in Africa, that it was the first time that children were given the space to speak up like if they were adults and to be listened to. And it was amazing. I mean, the NGO I worked with like completely freaked out because we were in Togo, and the adult, and I mean over there it's more like everything is very patronizing, and it's the adults controlling everything, and the NGOs controlling everything, and the mayor and all of those. And they would come to me and say, so what's next? Who's going to talk next? And what's happening next? And I said, I have no idea. I didn't plan, because on the day of the exhibition, I explained to the children, and they planned everything. I left the room and they planned everything. They decided to do a dance, a theater play, who was going to explain which picture and how, who was going to speak up, to introduce, to close, to everything. So I had no clue. So in that moment, the children, yes, they were empowered. But then what happened, which is what I had said to the client in the first place, what happened afterwards? Because what happened with those children is that they became leaders of their communities. They could have become the speakers, the spokesperson of the community.
Yeah.
Because they really, really understood their situation and the solutions. They had loads of solutions to talk about, and this is what they presented. But then if there is not a space, their children, if there's not a space to carry on being leaders, or if there's no one that listens to them, then where is the empowerment?
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's not empowerment. For me, it's creating harm in the community.
Almost a taste of what could have been, and then nothing's followed through. Yeah.
Exactly. And I knew that would happen. But there's not, I wasn't expecting it would be that empowering for them, to be honest. Yeah. And that broke my heart.
Uh-huh.
Because I did try to make the space so that the NGO would carry on afterward, but that it's completely out of my hands. So often, I guess the only way to have empowerment that can last, if it's a very long-term process within the community,
and that
really
becomes
long-term, over a few years, where they actually take ownership of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And they have careers to carry on, and they have the control over everything, and there's no NGO, there's no funding, there's nothing, just them. Then we could talk probably about empowerment. And also if they, many, when you do photo voice, or like I've done a lot of participatory video, many of the people who talk about empowerment is that you actually, I mean, photo voice is normally when you talk about, you talk about an issue, and then you try to go and talk to policymakers and make a change. That's what photo voice is supposed to be.
Yeah.
What I've done mainly is more participatory photography, where I give a space for people to express themselves. The advocacy part is harder. So I guess I would say there is an empowerment if the community, if the group itself then goes to talk to policymakers and make the change themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if there is an NGO in the middle, then is that really empowerment?
Depends on the motives of the NGO, doesn't it?
Exactly. And the NGOs have an agenda, and so there are communities that have really took ownership, especially in participatory video I've seen. And you know, they created their hub, and then they're making films, and they are using that as a tool to report human rights abuses and to talk to politicians. But I don't think that's empowerment. I don't think that's...
It's such a nebulous concept, I think, with empowerment is well, first of all, how do you measure it? And that's a difficult one. And you've got all these different layers, as you've indicated there. You've got individual empowerment, and where does self-esteem end and empowerment begin? When you've got the individual one, then you've got the community empowerment, and you've indicated quite a lot of issues around about that. Is who's involved, who takes ownership. If you have something like an NGO involved in that process, as I said, what are the motives there? Is the NGO constructed from locals within the community, or is this some sort of, I don't know, kind of white horse savior charging in from another country going, yeah, we're an NGO and we'll save you. And then once we've done our work, we'll leave and take no accountability for what's happened. There's so many factors.
And I guess there is something that really bothers me a lot. Like I've been reflecting a lot about photo voice and participatory photography lately. Because we do, that's not my words, but that's what people say. We give the power to the group to decide what they want to photograph, what they want to say, what they want to share, what they don't want to share, how they want to share it, where they want to share it. So they do have the ownership of everything they create. And that's, in a way, could be considered as empowerment, maybe. But how true is that, in a way? I mean, from my experience, the group, like if you really want the group to do that, then they need to have copies of all the pictures and all the text, so they can really use them as they want, not only us being the guardian of their archive and kind of organize exhibitions and organize things with them and for them. But which community really have the time, the energy, the money, and the IT knowledge or IT equipment to do that? You know?
Yeah.
So it's like, ideally, it's fantastic, but in practice, you know, you need to have a leader that has all of that to be able to carry on afterwards.
Yeah. And it's that long term investment in empowerment. Yeah. And I often wonder whether resilience would be a better concept in empowerment. I'm not saying that projects don't empower, because I think that there are some that definitely do. You know, if you look at the original photo voice projects that Wang and Burris initiated, that was the blueprint, really. But I wonder, with more short-term projects where we're not going back to see if there's any impact, whether resilience would be a better concept to look at. And if we're looking at kind of some sort of outcome for individuals, is there something that emerges from that experience that enhances their resilience on a day-to-day basis? Again, it's difficult to measure, though.
Yeah, I'm not sure resilience. I mean, it depends of the process. If you work with the community for years, then yes. If you work with the community for a few weeks, you know.
Yeah.
I think more than resilience, what I have seen in all the projects, whether they were short or long term, is definitely self-esteem, having a better idea of who they are, because there is a lot of self-reflection, a lot. Definitely expressing themselves. Some healing, whatever that means, in a tiny drop of healing, I would say, not complete, definitely. And yet resilience, if it's a long term. I mean, from many of the projects I've seen, some like there was this women's group that we worked with, and the main aim was they were single moms, and the main aim was to provide them for a space 3 hours a week to be creative and to be themselves as moms without their babies. That was the aim. But it ended up in a longer term project because they loved it so much. And we worked with a local creche, and the creche gave us 3 hours for free so that the women could come with us. And then the creche employed us to carry on because they could see the benefit of it.
Yeah.
And I would say that 90% of those women realized that they were not just moms. They were women, and they went back to work. And most of them are self-employed. And then what also happened is that it created a web, like a connection between all of them. So they all became friends and help each other with the children. like babysitters, or
Mm.
so it became like a support network.
Yeah.
You know, when I talk about it, I'm like, wow, that was a beautiful and we all
Totally.
became friends afterwards. But the initial aim was just, and we were doing dark room, so it was really like meditative for them,
Yeah.
and it became something else. So sometimes the project actually completely changed course, and that maybe was empowerment
Yeah. Yeah.
way.
It's
Also because we let the process took over,
Mhm.
and the project completely changed direction and objectives,
Yeah.
and how all the women kind of took decisions about their lives without expecting it.
Yeah.
Then I feel that is more empowerment than when you put into your project proposal, we are going to empower, we are
Mhm.
going to change, we are going to bring social change, all of that shit, sorry. You know, that sometimes we have to write in funding bids, or that we have, or that the clients say, or whatever, that sometimes like, yeah, well,
Yeah.
what is going to happen, you know?
I know I can't see a project bid saying, yeah, we'll work with them for 6 weeks and we'll see what happens. So
Yeah, and that's, and I think that's the empowerment in a way, because
Mm.
when you want to do something participatory, it should be participatory in the whole, you know, in a holistic way, that normally you lose control of what is going to happen.
Mhm.
So
Is
if
it?
you lose control, then the participants or the community take control,
Mhm.
and then maybe there is an empowerment, and you have to let go of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then there's clients in between, or there's NGOs in between, or there's objectives in between, and you know, so
Mhm.
it's quite hard to be able to let go, but
Yeah.
it's beautiful when it happens.
And especially if the whole purpose of a therapeutic photography intervention is to address those power dynamics and this issue of control, because really the intention is that you as a facilitator end up with the least amount of control in the process, and that the participants have the most control in that process. Yeah. Is there one project that's particularly stuck out for you? I mean, you mentioned the one there with the mothers. That sounds fascinating. Are there any others that really sort of resonate with you and go, yeah, that was a great experience?
Well, there's a few. Well, I guess I don't know if it's projects, it's more individuals' experiences and processes that I have seen,
Yeah.
more than a project. Like I remember this young boy, he was 10, I think, when he started to come, when we had the community darkroom. He was from the local neighborhood. And like at the beginning, his mom would always come with him and stay. He was homeschooling as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, at some point we were like, well, that's a space for him, you know?
Yeah.
So she started to leave him with us. And then like he would come every week, and then he started to, I would always remember this time when he was teaching like a 65 years old woman how to print.
Mm.
I've got this picture of them two together, because he was with us for so long that he became a bit of he was our favorite one, but we could see him changing so much.
Yeah.
You know, and at some point he was kind of starting to be part of a gang.
Mm.
And he told us, which I found very, I thank him for that, to
Mm.
have the trust. So we kind of, you know, talk to his mom. And so we had a very beautiful relationship also with his mom, and we would take decisions together. And so that was really, really a beautiful project. This project was beautiful, but especially because we could see him changing so much. And that was over a long term process. I also really liked a project that we did with young Latin American women in London. They were like feminists and activists and really, you know, critical thinking young women. And we were doing art to wall, which was a bit boring because we had to do a lot of portfolios and work. But we did an exhibition in a gallery, like in a proper gallery, in the Meunier Gallery in London. And the work that they created was outstanding. I mean, I worked my ass off on this project. Like, they would come to my house in the evenings to work on their personal project, and each of them had really like we really worked on the curation, on how the work would be displayed. It was not just pictures printed and framed. Everyone had like a proper design. Like one had a butterfly with small pictures, another one wanted some chain. So like some of them were printed on transparency, and we made like a mobile. And it was just so beautiful. And they all had really something to say about themselves as women, or about being migrants, or about, it was a collective work, because we did a collective conversation about a lot of themes. So there were some space for collective messages. But there were also some space for individual messages, which for me, I think this project has really changed the way I worked. Because I found that when you work collectively, you leave the individual process behind. And it can be frustrating. So from that, I have tried my best to have a collective. If it's a collective, to have space for the individual to stand out. And not only as a human being, but as an artist. Because sometimes what I feel also is that when you do participatory photography work, the exhibitions everything is stands, like it's the same. And I hate that. I hate that. For me, it's like each photographer should have, I don't know, whatever, 1 meter each, and they do whatever they want with it. Otherwise, they lose their identity.
And that defeats the purpose of any work you've done, really, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I do like projects where we had that space to really create the exhibition, so that each individual and artist could show their messages, but also their art as individuals. And then the collective space. For me, they are the best project when there's space for both.
You've offered a lot of advice already.
Sorry.
So the closing question was really about any other bits of advice you could offer. I guess particularly people who are working with photography as a therapeutic tool. So they've already got that basic knowledge, that the intention of doing no harm and using it as a therapeutic aid. And if they were thinking of then doing some sort of photo voice style project towards the end of their participation, have you got any advice for anybody doing that?
You mean to do a therapeutic photography and a photo voice together?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I suppose my fear is I don't think anybody should just go, I'm just going to go and do a photo voice project without any sort of training or guidance or understanding of what they're doing. So I'm assuming that people have got some understanding already. But just from your experience of working with so many groups, is there any sort of closing advice you would give anybody?
Well, I guess one of the first, I would always remember one day I was invited to give a talk about participatory photography, and the organizers said, I need you to come and shake things up and do a workshop, because there was a lot of artists and intellectual people talking. They were like, we need something that's, you know. And I started the workshop saying, if you are here because you are an artist and you want to do socially engaged work for your own benefit, you can leave the room. Because that's not what it is about.
Yeah.
It's if you want to do a photo voice, I mean, photo voice is a research.
Yeah.
You know, participatory photography is one thing and photo voice is another thing. Photo voice is a research method.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you want to do the research for in the first place? Who is the research for, and how is the group going to benefit from it? Where is the information going to be shared afterwards, and how? And what happened afterwards?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's more that invites more questions, so you don't create harm.
Mm-hmm.
And then participatory photography is more creating a space for people to express themselves, for me.
Yeah.
Without so much like the social change element and the advocacy element of the photo voice.
Mm-hmm.
So again, is like, what is it that you can offer to the group? What expectations are you going to create? And it's more like, why are you doing it for? Is it because you want to feel good about yourself because you're doing socially engaged work?
Mm-hmm.
Or you really care about an issue or a community and you really want to work with them, but have you consulted them?
Mm-hmm.
Are they interested in working with you? Are they interested in talking about this issue the way that you want them to talk about it? Are you ready to listen to stories that might go against what your thinking is about this issue? Like, do you want to go towards I had that before, where the client had an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they recruited the participants, that's recruitment is very important. She recruited the people who were against the tradition that she wanted to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that out myself
Mm-hmm.
afterwards, because I could feel that the dynamic within the group was really weird. They were like the older women and the younger women.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no communication between them. And then I find out, it's a long story, but then I find out that because the young people could not talk because they were an authority. So I had to change the whole dynamic and work with the young people in a group, work with the elder and then put them together once they were ready. But then one of the examples of that empowerment is that one of the girls felt so empowered that she decided to leave home to stop the tradition. And then she ended up in very drastic economic problems as a result of that. Because if you show people that this tradition is wrong and then they want to leave, but then what's the alternative to it? What's the consequences of leaving it?
Yeah.
So I guess it's also like when you give a space to people to reflect about something, think about the way you do it. Because if you empower them so much, at least reflect on what could be the consequences after you leave.
Yeah.
So it's always, what happens after you leave?
Yeah.
not only there's no equipment, so they can't carry on, so they feel frustrated, but you have opened a space for them not to talk only about therapeutic things, but about things maybe they like to change in their communities, but they won't have the power to change them.
Yeah.
So is it ethical and harmful to do that?
Potentially.
Certainly.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point. What happens next?
Certainly, you know, and
any project has to consider that. Yeah.
Of course. And that's one of the main issues that, yeah, people don't think about it, and there's limitations of, you know, of fundings and of time and of everything. So that's why I always make sure I don't jump into a project without thinking about that. I don't have the answers, you know. In many projects they had to stop, but the expectations were not that high.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if we do a project with young refugees, we're not telling them we're going to change their lives. We're not telling them we're going to change the law. We're just telling them this is a space for them to meet new people, to learn photography, to listen to each other, to tell their stories, to have fun, to explore London, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So I guess and that's one of the main issues I found with projects is how do you recruit the participants?
Yeah.
How do you present the project, and what expectations do you raise?
That's it. Yeah. Don't overpromise.
Don't overpromise. And people would always have expectations.
Yeah.
But you always have to make sure that things are clear from the start.
Yeah.
And like the first session, I would spend probably the first hour really making sure people understand what they're here for. Sometimes they don't even know what they're here for.
Yeah.
You know, and if once they've understood, they're free to leave. So that when we talk about consent, it's not only consent of using their images or not, it's also consent to participate.
Yeah. Totally.
And to leave whenever they want. And again, with the consent of images, sometimes people want us to make them sign the consent when they start. It's like consent is a process, and it has to be done at the end.
Yeah.
And a few times, and you have to make sure they really understand what they're consenting for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if you do that at the start, it also would inhibit what people choose to share and photograph. You know, why would you photograph something if you know it's there for public consumption at the end?
Yeah. So. Yeah, and I guess another advice, the equipment you use can also make a difference. Like if you have a long-term project, you could work with DSLR cameras because you would have time to go into the technique.
Yeah.
Because you can't give DSLR cameras to people and ask them to shoot in automatic because they'll be frustrated and they'll ask you questions and you'll have to answer and give that space. Otherwise, if you don't have that space, don't use those cameras.
No, I don't.
Yeah?
No.
It sounds silly, but yeah. It's not. And you know, we had a conversation lately with another photographer who's done a project similar to the Tejiendo Vidas project that we've done with the Colombians. And he has spent a lot. You can see the difference between the two projects. There will be an article published in the Membrana magazine.
Okay.
Next one, talking about both projects. And one of the main difference is in the images. You can see that in our projects, we didn't do any technical at all.
Yeah.
The main aim was therapeutic and the space to listen to stories. And we just use the images. It could be images from their archive, images from the internet, images from their phones. We didn't talk about, we didn't even talk about how would you improve it next time, nothing. While the other was a lot of photography tuition with, so you could see the pictures where really, the people really thought about each picture they took conceptually and aesthetically and creatively, and they're beautiful. Both of them are beautiful, but it was two different process. One was much longer than the other one. So I guess one advice is, when I don't often show images to groups. I like to work only with their images. I bring other images when I find that it could bring something for the conversation, but I wouldn't show other pictures for the technique, for example. And I would definitely not show images that were not taken with the same type of camera that we're using.
Yeah.
Because I feel that you kind of showing them things that they won't be able to achieve technically. It could be frustrating.
Yeah.
And the same, like, I'm a bit like showing work of professional photographers. If I work with small cameras, I'm a bit torn about it. Because again, you're showing something that was taken by a professional.
Yeah.
So yes, I use them sometimes just like for visual literacy or have conversation about ethics, but I'm very wary about what I show if they can't create that technically. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, and that's I tend to use camera phones, and I wouldn't show any of my own work, or I don't tend to bring any other images into it, because as you said, it's about that creative space for the individuals, and let's see what comes out of that group. I don't want to, kind of set aspirations too high or unrealistic. So
yeah, and I guess one advice is also follow the rules of participatory photography and photo voice methods, but also break them in the way that I find the photo voice method too rigorous for me, because I'm very creative.
Yeah.
So I like to bring other element into it, creative element into it. Like collage, like I don't know, like different things, because otherwise, yeah, what I find hard is that where there's not that space, when you, even if you do like a photo voice project, I feel like if you don't have that space for the people to be creative, then I find it very extractive.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be the opposite. So that's a dilemma I have a lot.
I think that's pretty good advice to end on, is break the rules.
Yeah, I mean, respect the ones that really need to be respected. So it's stick to the ethics and to the process.
Yeah.
It has to be a process.
Yeah. But it has to be creative as well, isn't it?
And it has to be creative, because if it's not creative, it's not a process, because a process is unique. So none of your project will be the same.
Yeah. And that's reassuring. Definitely.
None of them will be the same. None of them will be the same. Outcome will be the same. Anything. So you could do the same exercise and give the same advice twice, and it would be completely different.
Yeah. Ingrid, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me today. Are you okay if people contact you if they want to hear more about the work you've done? Have you got a website? Yeah. I can put the website address under the video here as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Well, thanks to you.